Well, first of all, we want to thank everybody that is participating in the 2020 Central Arkansas Real Estate Advocacy Forum. We've got several groups that are joining us in all of this. The Building Owners and Managers Association of Greater Little Rock, the Commercial Real Estate Council of Metro Little Rock, the Arkansas Apartment Association, the Institute for Real Estate Management's Arkansas chapter, the Arkansas Mortgage Bankers Association, the North Pulaski Board of Realtors, the Arkansas Land Title Association, the Arkansas Realtors Association, Plaza West, and Union Plaza Commercial Real Estate. And there's going to be a quiz. You'll have to recite all of these before it's all over.
Got it.
I'm just kidding. So it's like that cognitive test that you have to take, you know, where...
Oh, I think I can do that one.
Okay, we'll do that. So the members of these groups are real estate professionals who appreciate the opportunity to hear first, Senator Joyce Elliott, 2nd District Congressional candidate, the Democratic nominee. We want to hear your views on a range of topics. Thank you for being here.
Oh, well, thanks for asking me. I'm delighted to be here.
Before we get into real estate and tax and finance questions, I want to hear just a general, how has it been campaigning in a COVID-19 pandemic? You can't hug babies or kiss babies. You can't shake hands with people. How has this affected campaigning in your mind?
Well, it's been a discovery every day, because when people keep talking about normal, I've just kind of gotten that out of my mind, because you will just be standing still if you just dwell on that. But it's been different in that we've just had to be so creative all the time. And think about ways of, like, if you were going to go to a rally or something, how do you do that, you know, in times like this? You know, I'm one of those persons who, I'm over 60, well over 60, closer to 70 than 60. And you can't just be out among people, but you need to see people. They need to see you and ask questions. So one of the things we did early on, we rediscovered the magic of the pickup truck. So you go in a pickup truck and you can stand on the back of the truck and you can talk to people, and that creates instant distance without seeming standoffish, because if you just come here, we'll talk. And we actually use that. We've used that 2 or 3 times, and that's very helpful.
But we need to get the train system rolling again. You could just be on the back of a train.
Just have those stops along the way.
Yeah.
And the other thing,
whistle stop.
Yeah, that would be great, wouldn't it? But the other thing we've done too is, you know, as everybody else has, we've just become, you know, Zoom, I guess, aficionados by now. And honestly, you can create, I figured out, a new normal so quickly, because it's become so normal to do these Zoom events that I get excited when the faces start popping up on the screen, because it's different faces from what I've seen all day long. And so it's just really been a different way of thinking about, how do you do fields, for example? How does that team get out there? And so we had to come up with ways. I have a very good staff who are very savvy technologically, and they get online with people and do the phone banking right there online. And the cool thing about that is something, you know, used to when people would say, well, give me a list of names and I'll go home and call them. You go, you know you're not, that kind of thing. But in cases like this, you get, I don't know, 20 people on the Zoom. They're all sitting there seeing each other, where there's even instant accountability. So it's turned out to be something we've just decided we're not going to whine about it. We just do what we have to do to get it done. And it's been interesting.
Very interesting.
I imagine we will carry some of these things over, I suspect, as we go along.
Well, we will have a lot of COVID-19 related questions in the real estate field today. Let's begin with a question, a topic from the Institute for Real Estate Management. It's about moratoriums on evictions resulting from COVID-19. Tenants can't pay rent because they've lost a job or been furloughed. Landlords can't pay their mortgages because the tenants can't pay the rent. There's been this moratorium in place, but it has ended.
Right.
This can't go on in perpetuity. The president signed an executive action to apparently address this, although I think that is questionable.
Right.
What's the end cycle for you? How do we solve this problem? Because it cannot go on at the pace that it's at.
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is stop acting as if somehow by the magic of a number of days, we're going to be back to normal. Because let's just say the moratorium was in place for whatever number of days. And so the moratorium is ending and we still have in the same mess. So it seems to me we need to start thinking about this more in terms of balance in the present reality and beyond. Everybody deserves to have some place to live. Nobody should be evicted in times like this. On the other hand, if that's the only position you have, that is way out of balance with reality. I need a place to be sure I can have, a place to live. But if I'm the landlord, I'm likely paying for that building. I likely have a mortgage, whatever the case may be, I have bills to pay too. So going forward, it really seems to me that Congress needs to be a lot more thoughtful about recognizing the reality of where we are. And so if you're going to balance this, you need to think about both the people who own the building with the landlords and those who are the tenants, and make sure that we have funding so that neither person, the tenant should not end up in indignity of not having a home. The landlord should not end up with expenses that are beyond their control because they're basically forced to let somebody live there for free. So that's the thing I recommend, that Congress does.
So are you advocating some money, some resources from Congress to either
absolutely,
just steered towards the tenants or steered towards the landlords?
If we're going to have the moratorium, it then automatically needs to be steered toward the landlord if folks can't pay. And that's the kind of flexibility I think we need to have in this situation so that you don't run people bankrupt and you also don't run them out of their housing.
The president, as I mentioned, did issue an executive action. It has had some language in it. I'm going to recite a little bit of it. It directs the Department of Health and Human Services and the Centers for Disease Control to consider whether any measures temporarily halting residential evictions are necessary. Does that give a false sense of security to tenants in this position?
Yeah, I think it does. And one thing we need to do is I think one thing we've failed to do through this whole pandemic is not just have straight talk. And this is another example to me of not just giving people the straight talk of what's going to happen. Because if I am that tenant and I hear this language, I think, oh, there is hope for me. But all it says is somebody needs to consider, look at it. That's not the same thing as what will happen. And so I hope that Congress will get back around to not trying to create magical solutions based on this date, rather than having legislation in place that is flexible enough to match what the reality is, and we just aren't doing that. And because I know of people, I'm in touch with people who are afraid about the moratorium, the ending of it. I get that. And they hear something like that and they think, oh, it's all well and done, but it's not.
There was a similar question from the Arkansas Apartment Association about the compensating landlords on this. Does it matter to you whether it is a homeowner that is renting the property versus an apartment complex? Is there a different maybe equation that you see in that, or do you see this as kind of one and the same?
I kind of see it as one and the same. There may be some nuances that I just haven't thought about that we need to be concerned about. But the bottom line for me is, if you own an apartment, you shouldn't have to go broke, to be a good landlord. And if you live in an apartment right now, you shouldn't have to move, so that you can have housing unless there's some overriding reason for you to do so. So to me, it's about housing is housing. Whoever is the landlord is a landlord, and I don't make a distinction in this case. Unless somebody comes up with something that makes sense, have you thought about this? And there are always things we haven't thought of.
Yeah.
So I would hold out for something like this, but basically I don't see it as necessarily a nicely discriminatory act we ought to make that difference.
I want to stay in this sphere right here just so we can kind of tie this whole tenants' rights, landlord rights situation together. You've tried at the state level. You've been a big supporter of a tenant's Bill of Rights, a renter's Bill of Rights right there. Has not been successful in passage. What's the one thing that you have tried to change that you wish you could get changed, and could a federal platform be a better place for you to do that?
Well, I think getting tenants' rights is something that really, I don't know if I can get the traction at the national level to require all states to make sure that tenants have the rights, especially since Arkansas is the only one, kind of holding out, does not have one. What I do wish we could do, though, is at the state level, this is where it's bothered me the most. I would hate to have to take a bill to Congress because of something we have at our state level we've not been able to take care of. But I do think the habitability issue is really, really important. And of course, there are federal guidelines about habitability. And I don't think we can go on and keep coming to impasse every time we go to the legislative session and not get this resolved. Because it's something that has to do with the quality of life and maybe the quality of pocketbook with everybody, I guess, or this is the big issue. But it's just something that people ask me about this when I'm at national meetings and whatnot. And it's kind of shameful to me to say, no, we've not been able to work it out, so we need to work it out. If we're not, when I came to the Senate in '09, somebody approached me about a housing trust bill. And I found out Arkansas is one of the only 3 or 4 states that does not have a housing trust bill. I suspect if we could, and I got one passed in 2011. I think it was 2011. And we have yet to get funding for that housing trust bill. And at the same time, we talk about, we are bothered by homelessness. We want, residences that are habitable. And I thought this would be one way we could all work together and come up, with a housing trust that could allow for some of the things that I think have us at odds when we were trying to fix the whole issue of tenant rights. And I was just talking to a woman on Sunday. She owns lots of property. She's pretty new to Arkansas, and she was surprised. She's a landlord, and she's very surprised that we don't have a tenants' rights bill. And I told her, I said, well, we've been working on it, we just haven't gotten there.
Yeah. Where did she move from?
I believe they were from New Orleans at the time. Okay. Yeah.
This is a question from the Arkansas Land Title Association. It's COVID-19 related here, and this is a big debate that's happening up in Congress right now, and that is aid to state and local governments. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This has been debated in part for the new stimulus package, mm-hmm. that there is an impasse as we sit down and talk here. There is a gulf between Democrats and Republicans on this issue. Democratic leadership wants money for state and local governments that are losing money because of tax revenue that they're not collecting from the slowdown in the economy. Republican leadership does not want that. Do you support your party's leadership on this, and why?
Well, we're talking about the HEROES Act here, I assume, because that's where all that it's entailed. I do think we need to support the HEROES Act, but there's room for negotiation here. I mean, even the leadership says that. So I don't think anybody's talking about supporting it in its fullness, because there are some things in there that could be taken out that don't necessarily, right at this moment perhaps, are not as urgent. But when it comes to state and local assistance, which is what we're talking about here, I think that is massively important. And that's one of the things that the Republicans have had difficulty, or the president for sure, not wanting to send money to aid states and locals. But look at what's happening here. We were just talking about people unable to pay landlords for their rent. Then we're going to ask landlords to pay taxes. People are not going to be able to, we can't do all of that. We can't keep acting as if everything is okay and normal. And the number of people who are out of work are not paying taxes. So it stands to reason that if we want to make sure we continue to have our police, have our firefighters, and that when somebody calls an ambulance, you get an ambulance. If you go to UAMS, you can actually get assistance. If we're going back to school and think we're going to remain in school and do what we need to do to be distanced and everything else, if we're going to be able to keep things going in our city for quality of life that's not going to reduce us to, sometime in the mid-18th century, we have to have these public services continue. And the states and the localities cannot do this because the natural range of the way the money flows has been severely interrupted. So it's not giving something to the states and locals. It is doing what we should do in a pandemic. Because I wish we could just get hold of this one thing. I would hope that if some outside entity attacked Arkansas, we would not have to make the case that we need help. I would think that would be true with any state. And the same thing is happening here. It is not normal unless we're going to accept this new normal. And we keep wanting to do business as if, it's prior to January 2019. It's just not the case. So I absolutely think we need to help our state and locals.
You mentioned that there's room for negotiation on that.
Yeah.
I look at sales tax collections are one of the things that we look at on a pretty regular basis in different areas of the state. Jonesboro, Northeast Arkansas, outside of the district that you
Right.
want to represent, is actually seeing their sales taxes or collections are up. I
Yeah,
mean, so
yeah.
there is a lot of consumer spending in that region of the state. I know here in Central Arkansas, in Little Rock in particular, the restaurant tax collections are down maybe
Yes.
about 10%. Could be a lot worse, though.
Yes.
So when you talk about that negotiation, are you talking about flexibility in how the money is kind of structured, or are you talking about flexibility in just how much money is provided?
I think both how much and time, because I think there needs to be flexibility in, you don't say is from here to here, but rather have, perhaps a goal, a target, that if COVID-19 is acting in this way, that's when it would stop, rather than saying, this is going to be for 3 months, 2 months. We just don't know what we're talking about when we do
Yeah.
things like that. So I think there's some time for, there's
We
some,
put time periods on there just because it's easy
just
to
because
quantify. Right.
it's easy, and that's the problem. We keep trying to do things in an easy way for things that are hard and don't necessarily cater to our little deadlines. I mean, look at where we are now with our deadlines, without thinking about it as a target. When we reach this target, we will do this. So that could be a time thing that could be negotiable. But also, I think the amount could be negotiable. But I think the parties in Washington just haven't sat down to talk about what that amount should be. And it's probably going to be more difficult, but I get so tired of us saying we're not going to do things. Well, it's so hard. Yeah, as we say to kids, life is hard, and then we turn around and use that as an excuse. There may be ways to think about this too, depending on what the capabilities are, what the collection rates are, and I suspect that would be different in different parts of the country. And I think it would make sense to look at it by state, because you certainly can't get into every locality,
Right.
So.
Another topic that's come up in the age of COVID-19 centers around force majeure. The impact of this, and obviously you've got a lot of folks in this room and with these organizations that are putting this forum together that care about contracts and execution of contracts right here. Does force majeure need a new look or a new definition by Congress because of COVID-19?
Well, when I think about force majeure, I always think about when I'm traveling. Like I'm on, I just remember getting, marooned in Houston because of a tornado, a hurricane. And I think that was the first time I really realized, I think, what force majeure actually means in my life. Because I was, I don't know, maybe first or second year teacher. Obviously, it's redundant to say I didn't have any money, but I didn't. And I thought, I was thinking, well, we're all tied up here. They're going to pay for us to, go to a hotel. And then they point out that little line in the contract that says, if it's an act of God, no, we're not. And when I thought about that, I thought, yeah, that really does make perfect sense, because you don't know when it's going to happen, and you can't pay for everybody to go to a hotel. And I hadn't thought about that very much until I saw these topics. And so I don't know for the life of me how I would even think I'm going to go to court and sue American Airlines because they didn't put me up in a hotel, because this was an act of God. And so the same thing is here with the contracts that we have right now. We have good, strong contractual law in Arkansas right now. And so unless somebody wants to do something that is an act of malfeasance or something that is just negligent, I am not sure we need to bother with a law, because what lawyer is going to take up a case like that and go to court when clearly it says in the contract, or clearly we all know what this means? So I can't say I'm on the side of, I don't have any problem with looking at it, but I don't see that anybody has made the case that it's necessary. Because even when we talk about, a lot of the things about COVID-19, if COVID-19 isn't, is not something we have control of. We know this. So if everybody is doing what they know they should do, they're not being negligible, they're not engaging in malfeasance, the law stands. And I'm not sure there's anything that should be done about it at this point.
Yeah.
I have an open mind, but I'm not sure about that.
Kind of an example that I conjured up on this is, say you're a knee surgeon and the state of Arkansas has closed your business because it is one of the practices that's not going to be allowed under elective procedures, and you're down for a couple of months perhaps, and you can't pay your bills, sort of thing. I mean, I think that's where I kind of see it coming up, and how do you cope with that kind of situation besides just communication and cooperation between all of the entities involved.
Yeah, because like I said, I think it's, there's room for, and my mind's not closed to it at all, because when somebody, if you've got something that is going to make sense, and we can talk about that in a larger picture, but I think we need to be careful to start from making sure we don't open the door for negligence and malfeasance. Those two things, I think, have to be the
Okay, we're going to dive into some pretty technical questions here now.
Okay.
So again, this is a group that will support this. The Arkansas Mortgage Bankers Association, the North Pulaski Realtors Association have a question about tax credits for homeowners that don't itemize on federal income taxes. Right now you have to choose between the standard deduction or itemizing those things, which would allow you to deduct your mortgage interest per se. Should there be caps on that? Should there be a revisit of how that whole thing works? It was changed, I think, in the 2017 Jobs Act.
Yeah. Because I lived it and for 2 years, and when I filed the last 2 years in 18 and 19, for 19.
Was it to your benefit?
It was not to my benefit. Because, when I am single, and people talk about paying taxes, so I understand when you're single, you pay taxes out of your nose. I don't care if you make $1, you still do. And I'd been itemizing, all these years. When it came time for you can take the $12,500, whatever it is, standard deduction. And then as I kept reading, realized, but all this, I had everything all laid out, ready, ready to go, and realized, I've got to make a choice here. And for this thing that everybody says is your biggest, best investment, your home, I couldn't use any of that. And I do think that needs to be revisited, because a part of what we just beat people over the head with all their lives, part of the American dream is owning your home. And a part of that also was going to be the government, making it worth your while to do so, and incentivize it. An incentive. But I think that could definitely use some revisiting, because I really do think that's something that it's really been helpful to me, that I could deduct, a lot, and to anybody who is.
All right, a question from the Commercial Real Estate Council here. Keeping the 1031 tax deferred exchange in the tax code. This is a highly specialized part of the code towards real estate. Now, broadly stated, a 1031 exchange is a swap of one investment property for another. Is this on your radar as something that should be altered or revisited?
Well, it's not. I'm aware of it. It's not been on my radar as much as and many other things are, frankly. But certainly, it's something that I have thought about, because this is, to me, in this pandemic, looking at trying to figure out a way to come out of this and be fair to everybody. If past the $400,000 mark, if we're going to start taxing at that point, I think that should be open for discussion. What the rate would be, I think, is a really important part of what it is. When we should do something like that, I think, is also very important. But at a time when we are trying to crawl out of a pandemic and get our economy going again, I think we really have to be thoughtful about this and think about this in terms, as I started earlier, talking about the landlords, and the tenants. This, to me, is a matter of balance. How can we keep everything balanced and move forward thoughtfully and be fair to everybody and think about when is a time we can do this? When does it make sense, if it makes sense at all? And I get it that people want it, but I think it's something that we really need to be very careful about, especially in terms of amount. Maybe something we could talk about in terms of scaling up if we do it at all. But it seems now with everything that's going on, that this is an issue that really it does not take a front seat for me.
Last real estate question here from the Building Owners and Managers Association. The Corporate Transparency Act, this was actually, I think there was a vote last year on this bill. It's a broad bill. The heart of the concern is that it forces disclosures of ownership in small businesses in an effort to potentially curtail some sort of money laundering and things like that. That's the good government argument. The bad government argument is that it creates more paperwork and bureaucracy and a lot more work for small businesses. Congressman Hill actually voted against this when it came up. Do you have a position on the Corporate Transparency Act?
If things are going to be balanced, as I often use so much as a test, I think I would come down on the good government and open government side of this issue, because the public is just so suspicious of everything that's going on right now. And transparency is something that I think we can all help ourselves, the whole country, the way we doubt each other, the way we question each other and distrust our government. I think it's something that we ought to do. And that doesn't mean that we should be doing it in a way that is so onerous that nobody can get it done. But there is no question there's going to be paperwork, and I wish there weren't. But as small as it seems, it doesn't, I'm sure to somebody who's in a small business, it doesn't seem small. Most of the times when you say to people it's going to create a lot of paperwork, that doesn't resonate unless you've done it. But I've seen what that looks like. Yeah. And so we sometimes, do things to mitigate the paperwork side of it. Because I think it would be wrong to not do it just because it's going to create paperwork and say, oh, we've got to forego transparency because we have too much paperwork. Then let's solve that problem, not have people thinking that we don't want transparency, so that there is more openness about what's going on in our government.
Sometimes there's just a cumulative effect of it's just one more thing you have to do as a small business owner that just it turns you off to even trying to be an entrepreneur in the first place.
And that's a real, because I have, obviously in my Senate district right now, I have lots of small businesses. And so I do get it. And as a school teacher, similar, because we were forever, another piece of paper. And finally, we did get around to actually passing a law looking at mitigating some of the paperwork. And I think that's something we need to do, in business and for business as well in general, because there is too much paperwork. I get that.
All right, you get to end on a non-real estate question here. I would like to hear from you. What is the best political advice you have ever given or received?
The best political advice I think I've ever given is people don't owe you their vote. You just have to earn it. They don't owe you that. So recognize that when you get out there, they have a right to vote for you or against you, and don't harbor grievances, whichever one they choose, because if you do, you're going to destroy yourself. And I think that maybe the best advice I've gotten is not to allow running for office to turn you into something that you're not. Don't become a campaign character. Just be authentic about who you are, and not become this character because you think that's what people keep telling you what you ought to be. And that's really good advice. I'm not really sure I would have done anything differently anyway, but it was good to hear something hear that from somebody else, because it would just be too hard. It's hard enough to run as it is.
All right, State Senator Joyce Elliott, Democratic nominee for the 2nd Congressional District in Arkansas. Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. It's been a pleasure.